This is Dr. Tom Elam at the National Chicken Council Marketing Seminar, Hilton Head, South Carolina.
Dr. Elam, in your talk that you just gave, you talked about the real battle for corn and food versus fuel is really just beginning.
Right. If we think we've seen something so far, we have to keep in mind that in 2006, 2007, and early 2008, we had fairly substantial inventories of both corn and soybeans as fuel production from food ramped up. According to USDA, those inventories are going to be exhausted at the end of the 2007-2008 marketing year, or at the end of the 2008-2009 marketing year. At that point, when the inventories are all gone, we'll have to rely on current production to furnish both of our major sources of demand, food and fuel. In other words, the supply of these products, the beginning inventories plus the production, is going to go down. And as we've seen, ethanol production is, because of the mandates, is continuing to go up. And so the real trade-off between food and fuel is going to happen in 2008, late in the year, 2009, and 2010. That's when the real bill for the ethanol mandates and biodiesel mandates is going to come due.
Dr. Elam, how does the hedging situation look at the present time? What about timing on hedging?
Well, I know that producers are reluctant to lock in what they consider to be very high prices. But in the last 2 weeks, we've seen a real stark example of what can happen to corn and soybean prices when the market suspects that there's going to be a shortage that requires significant price rationing. We've had corn at well over $8 a bushel in 2009 futures, and we've had soybeans up around $16 a bushel. Those prices have dropped off significantly in the last week, due mainly to two things. One, the price of crude oil has come down, and secondly, the fact that the crop conditions report that comes out of USDA every week has indicated significant improvement in the conditions of both the corn and the soybean crops. However, the long-term demand situation is still very bullish for both corn and soybeans, and sometime in the next 30 to 60 days, producers should probably be looking at locking in a portion of their 2008-2009 feed cost.
You talked about the price of corn and the price of oil and gasoline. What does that mean for the prices that producers will be experiencing for their inputs?
It means two things. With the higher oil prices and fuel prices that we've got today, there's now a linkage between what our crops are worth, our corn and our soybeans, and the fuel market. We've never had to deal with that before, about 2006. That introduces two things. One, volatility. The volatile energy markets will now have an effect on our corn, soybean, wheat, and other markets. An effect we've never seen before. We've always had to deal with volatility, but it mainly came from weather. Now we have this added volatility of a totally outside factor. It has nothing to do with food production, nothing to do with corn and soybeans and their traditional uses, but has to do more with political situations in the Mideast or hurricanes hitting the Gulf Coast and knocking out refineries, et cetera, and so forth. And this is something that we in agriculture are going to have to learn how to deal with. The second fact is that as long as oil prices stay up where they are, and there's no indications they're going back to $20 or $30 a barrel anytime soon, we're going to have to deal with higher values for corn and soybeans, our two major feed ingredients. And that will also affect every other feed ingredient, whether it's on the energy side or the protein side of the diet. Those prices are going to remain higher than we were accustomed to prior to about 2006. They may come down from where they are today, but they're still going to stay much higher than we had grown accustomed to in the 1990s and early 2000s.
You mentioned in your talk that there's some good news for chicken producers, and I would like to ask you to let us know that.
Okay, yeah, there is some good news in all of this, and it may not seem like good news to a lot of producers, but the energy markets are so much bigger than the food markets in terms of the BTUs that are produced. I mean, we have spent thousands of years perfecting these crops for food use, and to try to turn them into fuel at this point is a little bit of a round peg in a square hole. The number of BTUs of potential fuel production in the world's grain crops is less than 10% of the total world petroleum usage. So the ethanol market can't really have much of an effect on global or even U.S. Fuel prices. On the other hand, the petroleum market has a huge impact on what ethanol is worth. And because of that, there will be a price of corn and soybean oil that will mean that the biofuel factories will have to shut down. And we've seen that happen in just this summer. We've seen several ethanol plants shut down because of higher corn prices. We've seen biodiesel production from soybean oil drop because it's so unprofitable right now to produce methyl ester, which is the product that goes into biodiesel from soybean oil. On the other hand, there is no limit on what we can get for chickens or beef or pork. I mean, we have to reduce production to make that happen, but we don't have that artificial ceiling hanging over us of what we can afford to pay for corn. So in the long term, it may be a very painful process to get there, but I'm convinced that people would rather buy corn used to produce chicken than corn used to produce ethanol, everything else being equal. And we do have to eat, and these cost increases can be passed along with relatively modest reductions in production. And I think the food industry can compete very well long-term with the ethanol mandates and so forth, and will probably adjust to this new factor in our life over the next 2 to 3 to 5 years and survive and be as healthy as it's ever been, albeit at prices and costs that are much higher than we've become accustomed to.